What's up, agency owners? Jason Swenk here. Have another amazing show for you with the Smart Agency Masterclass, a podcast dedicated to digital agency owners scaling their agencies faster and sharing other people's stories. This guest has written two amazing books, has owned a successful agency, and we're going to talk about soul. So let's go ahead and jump into it. Hey, Ralph, welcome to the show.
Jason, my pleasure to be with you tonight.
Yes. Well, before we kind of talk about the soul of an agency and really so we can create better businesses, better culture, and everything like that, tell us who you are and what do you do?
Yes, so my name is Ralf Specht, and I've been in the agency business for a good 30 years, right? Spent 22 years with McCann, um, based out of Germany, and working on global and regional businesses here in Europe, and again, global businesses. Spent a lot of time in the US, in Asia, and very different places in Europe. And back in 2010, I received a call from a former colleague, Steve. And Steve said, "Listen, I'm up for something here. I've got the opportunity to build a joint venture agency with Jaguar Land Rover to actually restore the Jaguar brand. And would you be up for it?" And I said, "Well, are you joking?" And he said, "No, I'm not joking." I said, "Well, send me the business plan. I want to see it." And then like 24 hours later, we basically shook hands and said, let's do this and make this happen. It was a one of a kind agency. It was a joint venture with Jaguar and Land Rover. We started with 4 offices in LA, Frankfurt, Germany, London, England, and Shanghai, China, and 80 people. And when I left and had become the CEO in the meantime, I left 1,200 people and 19 offices. And it's been a uh, great, great phase of my career, something I'll never miss. And actually, when I left, there were so many emails I received and text messages I received from former colleagues that were so moving that inspired me to write the book Building Corporate Soul, because what those emails and messages basically said was, when, or as you, as the last of the founding team, is leaving the boat, we're really thankful for the culture that has been created that has allowed us to win 4 Effies in just a short period of time, build the number one website, and do many industry firsts, and most importantly, do all of that against a culture that was driven by 3 beliefs, which was be bold, be brave, be honest. And that's what everybody said they were doing. It was very touching. And I thought actually the message is too valuable to just stay on my iPhone.
Well, a lot of people are listening, and a lot of people talk about building culture, and really hiring based on beliefs. How is your framework different, or why don't you walk us through kind of the framework?
Yes. So hiring on beliefs, hiring on attitude, hiring on soft skills. These are all these buzzwords that are flying around. And obviously, we had the opportunity to build an agency from scratch. So there was just us 5 founders. And still remember the day when we sat in a room in London, and we're like, okay, now we've got the green light. We really got to do this. So what's the culture that we would like to see in the agency, and what behaviors do we want to see in the agency? It was pretty difficult, to be honest. It became very easy once we flipped the question and said and asked ourselves, which behaviors do we not want to see? That was pretty much sparking every idea, and flip charts became crowded very quickly. And from that on, we basically built the agency, built the organization against those. So I think the thorough question, what do you don't want to see in your company, in your agency, is very helpful to drive who you want to become. And for us, it was straightforward. We wanted to, because the model was unique as an industry first joint venture. It allowed us to do many things differently. And that was a great opportunity, which resulted in great work. But when you think about culture as an enabler of great work, which it is, you have to really think and as an agency do for yourself what you recommend to clients all the way, right? You got to figure out your purpose. Why are you here? And my framework looks at it and defines it as the shared purpose, because we've all been in purpose conversations over the last 10 years, and you couldn't stop those. And they're all valuable, but if the end game of a purpose conversation is a great PowerPoint deck, then you've just achieved nothing, right? So that's why I call it a shared purpose, and shared in two ways. One, shared by the leadership team of the agency or the company, and B, shared with all stakeholders. And as long as your receptionist doesn't know and doesn't understand what the purpose of the place is, you haven't achieved anything. So if you got that, that's the shared purpose is the first step. The second step is what I call the shared understanding. And that includes all the strategic elements like the vision, the mission, the values, but also a fourth one, which I think is very often overlooked. And it goes back to that flip chart moment that I just referred to, which I call spirit. So it's vision, mission, values, and spirit. And spirit, from my perspective, is the intended culture. So as leaders of the company, what culture do you want to see? And once you get all of these all together and in sync, the shared purpose and the shared understanding, the hard part starts, right? Because everything up to then it's been like strategic thinking and putting it all down on paper. But then the rubber hits the road, and you have to actually make sure that the behaviors inside your workplace reflect what you've just written up. And that's why these shared behaviors are really, really critical. So shared purpose, shared understanding, and shared behavior. And if you would like to simplify it a bit, which agency people usually do, shared purpose to me is about the being, shared understanding is about the believing, and shared behaviors is about the belonging. And when you look into what McKinsey has been talking about lately in their study about why employees are leaving their workplaces in spades, the number one reason is they don't feel a sense of belonging. So it goes all back to the shared behaviors, which are really, really critical. And it's nothing different for an agency than it is for any other corporate company. And while agencies very often are very, very good in recommending their corporate clients what they should be doing, very often they're not so smart when it comes to doing it themselves.
Give us a couple example, or give us an example for the agency that you guys started with 1,500 people. Give us from the purpose to the belonging and all of that, just so everyone can be like, okay, I get it.
Okay. So, I mean, we started as a global agency from the get-go. And anyone who's been working in multinational agency environments knows this wonderful blame game about P&Ls and stealing revenues from other offices within the same network. So that was a no-go for us from the get-go. So we set up, and that was 2011 when we did it. And when Martin Sorrell with S4 Capital launched it like 3 years ago, I was like, okay, well, we actually did that 10 years ago, which was one P&L, a single P&L, and a mantra of better, faster, cheaper. And for us, it was that sequence: better, faster, cheaper, not faster, better, cheaper, because we felt the quality always needed to be upfront. So it was always criteria number one. So the single P&L drove the organization, and with that, everything within the organization was set up to support collaboration rather than fighting. So by design, we organized complementary roles across the 4 offices. So the offices had to work together, otherwise they couldn't deliver on the various client briefs. When it comes to the belonging element, I always say to people, if the CEO tells you, my place has got soul, that's great because he recognizes culture is critical. But actually, what he says doesn't really necessarily mean that much. Whether a company or a place has got soul or whether the culture is great, you don't have to ask the CEO. You have to ask the employees, and that's what we did from day one. So we created a formal evaluation structure, which we did initially 4 times a year, which drove every manager to talk to his team and understand in this evaluation, like a half an hour session, what mattered to them, what happened, uh, what part of the performance worked well, and so on and so forth. Initially, we did this for or different evaluation um, um, templates for each profession, like the creatives and the account people and the finance people and so on and so forth. And we did that for a while and then figured out actually um, the complexity that we built into that was too large. So we flipped it, and because we came to the conclusion that we needed to leverage those evaluations for the uh, for ensuring the values of the agency, which we embodied under Be Bold, Be Brave, Be Honest, were actually happening in real life and in a client-facing environment and in an inner agency environment. And so we ensured that those evaluations always happened. There was a score that was attached to it and a financial benefit that came depending on the score. And that drove a lot. And I mean, I started by saying that we wanted to become a global agency. And so what we've done was like making sure that all the things that are very, very difficult, usually in global agency, we wanted to make them very easy and simple. So exchange programs between offices, no issue at all. A lot of that happened. Actually, two of my colleagues in Spain and Brazil, Leticia and Gonzalo, developed what we then codified as Spark BNB, which was basically an exchange program for like a month or two, where two people within the same function of two offices just swap jobs and spend time in another office to understand the culture, make connections, and actually leverage on the work in their home offices and vice versa.
So I'm st- so was the purpose of the agency was to be a global business, or I'm just not following you on the what was the purpose where people could get behind that and believe in it.
Well, the purpose that we defined was to challenge conventions so that amazing things happen.
Okay, I got you. Perfect. Awesome. And in your book, you talk about how Airbnb and Salesforce and a number of other different companies, build soul in their company. Give us a couple examples of what they're doing right or what they're doing wrong.
Well, in the book, I've looked into the companies that do it right. Right, I didn't want to do much of a blame game here because I think there's so much to learn from companies that do it right. And I think Airbnb is a wonderful example because they got their purpose in terms of putting belonging at the center of their company uh, in a great way. And as we all know, culture always shows when times get difficult. It's always easy when things go well and you can have that extra party and everybody feels good and all the rest of it. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about is a culture, because every company has got a culture. You can't have a company without a culture, but not only few got soul. So has that company a culture that actually takes them also through the bad days? And Airbnb is a great example for that because when the COVID pandemic started back in 2020, um, like any other hospitality business, they were in trouble, in big trouble, because nobody was booking any houses or any apartments, and they had to let go 25% of their workforce, which was I think 1,600 people, if I'm not mistaken. And when you look into how they have done it, because you probably don't even know that they had to do this, right? And you compare that to better.com when was it? November, I think, when they had to make 25% redundant, and the whole world knows about better.com because of the way they did it. The Zoom call with everybody and everybody going nuts. So what Brian Chesky from Airbnb did in this, when he had to do it, was just remarkable, and I'm really grateful that I was allowed to print the full statement that he shared with his employees and his colleagues in the book, and I think it's 6 or 7 pages long. And what it does is, he explains what is happening and why it is happening. It's been done. This was, I think, the 6th or 7th memo in the context of COVID. So he had been preparing people for the unknown, because at the beginning nobody knew, but it was very, very fast. Everybody knew that this had huge implications. And then he was doing, I think, two really critical things. He was ensuring that people that had to leave didn't leave with a trauma. Everybody and people that stayed understood that those that were leaving were a critical part of bringing Airbnb to where they had been to at this place. And he was making everything possible to make sure that everybody who was affected by the layoff received lots of support, and whether it was just they could take their computer, they had a mentoring scheme. They help with people finding new jobs. It was a class act of ensuring that your company's soul, that the heart of your corporate culture was intact, even in those very, very dark days. And again, as I mentioned, not many people heard about it because it was handled that well. And when you looked into the LinkedIn comment areas when it happened, lots of comments from people that were affected by it actually were grateful about the way it was handled and managed.
Very cool. Well, this has all been amazing. Is there anything I didn't ask you, Ralph, that would benefit the audience?
Well, I think the when you talk about culture, very often there's this sentiment of it's an airy fairy thing, and it's kind of soft. And I was trying to make it a hard fact. And it's not just me; some others have done it as well, and the numbers all connect very easily. So the book contains the Soul Index, which is about companies that do it well, and it's the top 20 companies. And to do it well, as I mentioned earlier, employee votes count more than anything else. And when you looked at the Soul Index, which Adobe is number one and Salesforce number two and Microsoft number three, these companies, the top 20, have outperformed NASDAQ, and NASDAQ has been performing pretty well over the last 10 years, right? So NASDAQ over the last 5 did 180% return, and the Soul Index did 199% return. So it really works. And when you talk about agencies, I think there's two elements that are important. One, agencies are companies too, right? So corporate soul applies to agencies as well, and some have really great cultures, and others have challenges, and you find that easily when you look into those who are struggling to find new team members. Really critical issue. But at the same time, I think agencies are impacted by what they do for their clients as well. And when they're talking about their client work, very often it's about value propositions. And there's one example in the book which I think speaks volumes. So Microsoft, as I mentioned, is number 3, and Microsoft's external value proposition is to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. And when corporate soul is about the integrity of what you say and what you do, then Microsoft, with their internal value proposition, so the value proposition to its employees, which is be the one who empowers millions is very much in sync with exactly that external value proposition. And very often, these two are not in sync. Very often, the internal value proposition doesn't really exist. Marketing doesn't talk to HR. HR is not involved in that external piece. But you look into the studies that like RepTrack and their global reputation tracking, the things that matter most in terms of reputation is the workplace and the culture at the workplace. And I mean, most recently, I mean, the big Amazon campaign in the US is all about employees talking about why Amazon is a great place to work. And you can do a lot with that. But again, you can't fake it. So it's got to be real. And hence, you need to start with a shared purpose, get to this shared understanding and the shared behaviors. And hence, my vision is to make soulless companies a thing of the past, because I think there's more power, more performance to those companies and happier employees. And what else can you wish for?
You mean a purpose is not just to make a ton of money? I talk to some people and they're like, I want to build $100 million agency. I'm like, well, what's the purpose? Well, that's the purpose. I'm like, okay.
Well, then good luck. Good luck. I mean,
I think they're
I've run a 100 billion agency, and the one thing I can tell you is you wouldn't get there if you haven't got that sense of purpose. There's something bigger, and when people are saying, I don't feel a sense of belonging, then if your purpose is I want to make 100 billion, then probably that's the reason why there is no sense of belonging.
Yeah, I always kind of make them question that. I'm like, well, how are employees going to rally behind that? They'll make more money. I'm like, I can tell you from someone that has been fired from every job, and I've been on that other side of, kind of like the mute. I remember my first job, I was fired or laid off on a call recorded mute mode, and there was 10,000 of us on there. And you couldn't talk. It was recorded. Like, it was just like, pick a time you want to be fired and then attend this session. It's hard for the employees to get behind it. One of our whole purpose in our agency is really to create a resource I wish I had in our first agency. And everyone can rally behind that. And it enables everyone to be able to make decisions rather than kind of be the toll booth that funnels everything to you. And that's why I find a lot of agency owners getting stressed out, burnt out, is because everything depends on you, because you didn't give them the power to make the decision, because you didn't show them the purpose, the belonging. And belonging is I think, one of the most important parts, because I tell everyone, if you hire the right people, you'll never have to motivate them, but you have to worry about demotivating them. And if you demotivate them, they are out of there. And then you lose half your workforce. And then you stress out even more. And it's a snowball effect that really happens. So I want to thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's I think, two fundamental questions that you have to ask yourself. So when it comes to the shared behavior and the belonging, there's one question, which is, what does it feel like to belong here? If you reflect on that thought and that question, you get to the right answers. And then once you've reflected on that, the next question is, how do we create belonging for others, and how we make sure they feel they are belonging? And I think for the agency owners, I think there's a great piece of business waiting for everybody, because clients are looking for these kinds of conversations. But I was recently talking to a friend who runs an agency consulting or client pitching consulting business on the West Coast, and we talked about the books, and he said, well, I've been doing this for, I don't know, 20, 30 years, and agencies are everything to everyone. is kind of what I have felt. But he said, I got hope because most recently I was running a pitch for a client. And there was one agency that actually said, we're going to be interested, but only if we can have one meeting to see whether there's any sense of um, shared shared ideas and shared vision about how to work together. And they were very serious about it. And I understand that that agency actually won the business. And the reason was because the client said that it was the only agency that said, well, we might not work with you, but we want to find out whether we could work with you.
Yep. And I tell agents, I'm so glad you mentioned that because we did that all the time when we would, and I have a saying for RFPs, request for punishment, real effing problem. Like whenever any big companies, because we did everything like kind of like you guys were doing with Aston Martin, we did everything in North America for Lotus Cars and a number of different. I remember when they were like, well, we have an RFP. We're like, no, we want a meeting and here's our process. If it works for you and works for us, we can talk. But we were always willing to walk away because I always said, there's no such thing as a bad agency client. There's a bad prospect that will turn into a bad client. If they're not going to follow my process now, they're hell of not going to follow my process later on. And so but it took us many, many years to get to that.
And it isn't easy because there's lots of pressures, and the agency world is very dynamic. But I mean, you talk to anybody who's run a successful agency, and you always come back to the same thing: is they have created that aspiration, they have created that purpose for what they want to stand for, and what they want to come out with. And I mean, the energy that happens when it happens is incredible, is really incredible. And it's worth because and as I mentioned, I mean, I was just as the second book, the Beyond the Startup, which is about Spark 44 in depth, is coming out in early May. And as I was posting on LinkedIn about it, one colleague came back to me, and I hadn't talked to that person for probably 3-4 years when she had left, and she said, well, thank you for the opportunity to work for what I knew was a one-of-a-kind company. And since leaving, I've referred to Spark 44 practices, soul and leadership endlessly. It was an incredible time, and what you accomplished deserves to be shared. This book, I'm sure, will do that. Thank you for the opportunity to re-experience my time. I led the agency team for another global automotive brand, a model similar to Spark 44. The global agency team tried so hard to emulate what Spark 44 achieved, but it wasn't to be. Despite great leaders, the client weren't ready to trust, and the agency didn't have you and Steve. And I mean, you receive messages like that. It's very moving, but it basically brings back the spirit that has been what made this place a great place to work.
Exactly. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show. We'll, if you guys want to have a link to we will link up to both books in the show notes. So make sure you guys go to jasonswenk.com. And if you want to be around amazing agency owners where we can really see the things you might not be able to see and be able to really help catapult and get you to where your agency needs to be, where you're able to create the freedom to pick and choose what you want to do, whether it be your clients, your employees, what you want to do in the agency. I'd love for all of you to go to digitalagencyelite.com. And until next time, have a swank day.